You know, admittedly, I'm surprised we haven't had more of these stories. White professor investigated for quoting James Baldwin's use of N-word. Lori Sheck, who teaches at the New School, says inquiry followed a complaint that she had discussed Baldwin's use of the slur. Yes, because professors aren't allowed to tell you about words that exist. And now there are two N-words. I'm not trying to be dismissive. It is true. I'm going to go ahead and say one of these words, which won't get me banned, and it's Nazi. But the reason I say it's an N-word is because by saying that, there it is. This video will be deranked and demonetized. In many ways, I am being told by YouTube not to use the actual word. In which case, I have heard people refer to it as an N-word. But this is how insane everything is getting. You can't talk about certain ideas without getting people mad. And now we have another one of these because it was, I think like a year ago or something, a Netflix executive was fired for explaining that the N-word was offensive to people. And now a white professor investigated for quoting James Baldwin, civil rights activist? Are you nuts? Oh, this is why we can't have nice things. You know, see, I laughed at the story just before this. I don't know if you saw it, but they're saying dairy farming is sexual exploitation of cows. And that is so absurd, it's funny. This is so absurd, it's sad. Right, now now everybody who had that good laugh in the last segment, I'm gonna bring you down and show you how the world is actually getting twisted. But let's read the story. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There's a PayPal option, a crypto option, a physical address you can send to. And the reason I say this is because, look, this video is gonna be deranked hard. Just for saying N-word, right? For saying Nazi. So if you do like my content, I ask that you share it. Because I've been looking at analytics, and I gotta say, man, I don't know if YouTube is a long-term thing. I really don't. I don't know what's gonna happen, but YouTube has been absolutely deranking not just me, but even left-wing people like David Pakman. But let's read. The Pulitzer-nominated poet, Lori Sheck, a professor at the New School in New York City, is being investigated by the university for using the N-word during a discussion about James Baldwin's use of the racial slur. Let me tell you the difference between leftist and liberal. George Carlin was a liberal. He was pro-choice, he was anti-war, he railed on the government all day and night, and he said a slew of racial slurs in one of his bits to make a point that context matters. It's not the word, it's the person behind the words. George Carlin was amazing. Let's read on. The investigation has been condemned by the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education, FIRE, which is calling on the New School to drop the misguided case because it warns faculty and students that good faith engagement with difficult political, social, and academic questions will result in investigation and possible discipline. Sheck, who is white, was teaching a graduate course this spring on radical questioning in writing. She assigned students Baldwin's 1962 essay, The Creative Process, in which the Black American writer and civil rights activist argued that Americans have, quote, modified or suppressed and lied about the darker forces in our history. I believe that's fair too. That's true, yeah. And must commit to a long look backward whence we came and an unflinching assessment of the record. During the class, Sheck pointed to the 2016 documentary about Baldwin, I Am Not Your Negro, and asked her students to discuss why the title altered Baldwin's original statement, in which he used the N-word instead of Negro during an appearance on the talk show. Sheck told Inside Higher Education that a white student had objected to her language. According to Sheck, she questioned the student about her objection, who said she had been told by a previous professor that white people should never use the term. At the end of the term, the student gave a presentation about racism at the New School. Sheck told the IHE that she used the word because Baldwin, a New School alumnus, did, and, quote, as writers, words are all we have, and we have to give Baldwin credit that he used the word he did on purpose. In June, months after the class, Sheck says she was called to a meeting where she was questioned about her choice of reading assignments and how she had prepared students for discussing Baldwin's essay. She told the university that graduate students on a literature course, quote, should reasonably be expected to be able to discuss painful or offensive language and the various implications of altering the words of an iconic writer. As the meeting ended, she was given the university's guidelines for dealing with issues of discrimination and told to familiarize herself with them. But Scheck told The Guardian that the university is proceeding with an investigation despite its regulations stating that complaints of discrimination must be lodged within 60 days of an incident, which had passed by the time the complaint was made against her. Think about the results of this kind of action. Okay, Baldwin, famous civil rights activist, made a point and someone changed the context of his writing to avoid being offensive. Now, just don't assign it. Stop talking about Baldwin. Stop talking about civil rights because there are offensive truths buried beneath the surface. Is that the result? No one can bring up these concepts anymore? Apparently so. Quote, I have been left completely in the dark with the accusations against me still actively in place, and classes starting in 2 weeks, she said. Having taught at the new school with an impeccable record and consistently stellar student evaluations of my classes for nearly 20 years, this drawn-out approach appears to many as an unnecessarily callous and insensitive treatment of a devoted and long-time faculty member. The bell tolls for thee. What is it? Ask not for whom the bell tolls for thee. Listen, you reap what you sow. Can I do a bunch of these like idioms? I love these things. I also love analogies about ice cream. If you watch my channel, you know I always do the ice cream thing. Listen, when you push this rhetoric, when you advocate for this culture, don't be surprised when you are the target of what you preach. I want to make a point. I think there's an amazing thing to be said about James Baldwin's essay. Look at it this way. Let me tell you a story about when I was young. I remember growing up being told that Christopher Columbus discovered America. I was then later told that he actually didn't discover America. He landed in the Bahamas and the Caribbean. So he never actually set foot on, where we are today. I'm not going to go through the history of whether or not that's true, but that's what people were saying. But then the question was brought up later on. It was actually Leif Erikson. That's right. The Viking, I believe he was a Viking, Norse. There's like a statue of him in Iceland. He actually came to the Americas first, something like 1,000 years before Christopher Columbus. And so I was asked when I was young who discovered America. And people would always say Christopher Columbus. And then I would have some snooty teacher be like, actually, it was Leif Erikson. And then one day, I think it was my mom, she said, the Native Americans were already here. And it's like, oh yeah, it was already populated. So you can say in terms of like European history, which European made the initial discovery by all means, but thinking about the greater context of the world, there's a great point made by Baldwin that history is written by the victors, and our view of our own history is often skewed by us, patting ourselves on the back and ignoring the horrifying things that have been done by us and by anyone else. Now, I think one of the problems we face with the social justice crowd is that they don't realize other groups aren't, okay, I'll avoid, you probably know what I was going to say. I'm not going to say it. But you have other countries that are still pushing their own national supremacy. China, for instance, is pushing us on all fronts. And the problem is, yes, we can reflect on our bad history, but we will likely be overtaken by doing so. And it's a difficult position. So here's the thing. The point I'm trying to make by bringing this up. I think Baldwin was a good dude, right? A civil rights activist. He made a bunch of really important points. I watched that documentary. I thought it was great. Interesting. I don't say I agree with everybody when it comes to historical movements and activism, but I think there are some great people in our past who bring up important points, and they don't have to be perfect characters. However, let's talk about true social justice as opposed to what this is. Here's a guy, a famous civil rights activist who we should listen to and think about critically. Don't just agree with everyone from the past. That would be absurd. But there are probably some good ideas buried deep within, and civil rights was a fantastic and important thing, especially, I'll tell you what, from my family history, 100%. People like Baldwin and others were the ones who helped my family get on and live peaceful, happy lives. When miscegenation was, they had laws against this. You couldn't cohabitate. You couldn't live in the same house if you were different races. That's insane. That's why I think social justice is a good thing. Fighting against a system of oppression. However, what we often see from these people is not fighting oppression. Telling a professor she can't say a word is not fighting oppression. She was fighting oppression, right? And so I'm not going to say I agree with this teacher because I'm very skeptical of somebody who's going to be, a professor at the new school. But she brought up a point. They changed the word from the N-word to the word Negro. Why? Because they didn't want the N-word. But he chose it for a reason. You can see how social justice is being dominated and watered down by authoritarian weirdos who are actually damaging the cause of true social justice. Now, some people have pointed out social justice is just justice. That's fine, whatever you want to call it. The point is, we are a country with a constitution, and there were statements made by our founding fathers who didn't realize the true genius of what they were saying. and in the future, we looked at their document and we looked at it stripped of any ideology or context based on bias and racism and said, you know, at the end of the day, we are all created equal and that must be upheld. Now we have people pushing back on this. When a professor says we should be able to use this word to make a point, she gets an investigation because of it. I'm surprised it's been so long since I've seen a story like this, considering, you know, the Netflix thing was last year, but expect worse. You know, people point the fingers at these professors, these leftist professors, for creating this culture, and they contribute to it. So congratulations, you reap what you sow. The whole thing backfires on them, making everything worse. I don't know where it'll end up, but I'll leave it there. Stick around. One more segment coming up in a few moments, and I will see you all shortly.